was also at Cambridge that I met Reverend Henslow.
My life flows on. The first man to paint a portrait of every bird in North America. Bonjour, madame, mademoiselle. My name is John James Audubon. You have heard of me, no? I was the first man to paint a portrait of every bird in North America. It took me more than 30 years, but eventually I amassed a collection of 465 species of bird. Many of them I was the first to paint. I'm here to share with you my travels in the wildest places in North America. But most important, I'm here to share with you my love for the birds of this land. I was born on the Isle of Santo Domingo. I believe you call this island Haiti. My father, who owned a rather large plantation, yes, my father did own slaves, but he was kinder to his slaves than most, for when the slaves of Haiti had an uprising and murdered their masters, that's one way to earn your freedom, they did not murder my father. They warned him of the upheaval, and they aided him in his escape. And when he fled the island, he fled with everything of value, including his only son, me. And he took me back to Nantes, to Loire, in the Loire River Valley in France, where my stepmother, the only mother I ever knew, she spoiled me. Every morning, she'd send me into the forest and fields with a basket filled with fine edibles. Every evening I came home, my basket would still be full. Of course, I'd eaten the sandwiches and chocolat. You like chocolat? But after I emptied the basket, I would fill it once more with pretty pebbles I found along the shore. And every stone I found, I would ask, is it igneous or metamorphic or sedimentary? Every feather I found, I would ask, what bird and what part of the bird? Let me ask you. Look at the size, the shape, the color. What bird and what part of the bird? If you ask questions and look for your own answers, Mother Nature will reveal herself in all of her mystery. Now, my papa, who was good friends with Monsieur Washington, you know George Washington, yes? My father had a fleet of 6 ships, and he helped to run the British blockades, delivering troops and supplies throughout the war. Monsieur Washington gave my papa a small cameo and recommended that he purchase property along Pelican Creek. You know about Valley Forge. Have you seen that famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware? When Washington was camped at Pelican Creek, at Valley Forge, waiting for night and the cover of darkness to attack the British and catch them unawares. He was camped near my father's farm. But I am getting ahead of myself. As my father sailed in the triangle of trade with slaves from Africa, raw materials from the Americas, and finished goods from Europe, wherever he went, he would bring me a souvenir. You like presents, yes? From Africa, he brought me a small monkey. Would you like to have a pet monkey? No, you would not. They are mean and they smell bad. And when they are mad, they throw their poop at you. I did not like this beast. But from the Caribbean, he brought me a scarlet macaw. Do you know this bird? Large parakeet, long tail feathers, red and green. I love this bird. When I was a little boy, 5 years old, I was eating my breakfast, and my parakeet landed on the chair beside me. He said, "Du pain au lait para parakeet? Du pain au lait para parakeet? Parlez-vous français? Du pain au lait, bread and milk, pour la parakeet." Yes. Of course, I shared a crust of bread with my favorite bird. The monkey wanted the piece of toast. The monkey came marching across my breakfast table. The monkey came marching across my breakfast, grabbed the parakeet and promptly removed his head. I was a little boy, 5 years old. I began to cry, "Kill the monkey! Kill the monkey!" Of course, they did not kill the monkey, but I'll tell you, my servant did put a chain about his ankle, and the monkey never went anywhere without his chain. As for my beloved parakeet, my mama gave me a small wooden box, and we buried him in the backyard. It was a funeral befitting the king of France himself. As my father sailed in the triangle of trade, whenever he came home, he would ask, "Have you been a good student? Have you? Practiced your violin?" I must admit, I'd rather be in the forest and fields, drawing birds and gathering stones. When my father asked me to play a song for him, I played quite poorly. He was so mad at me until I took him to my boudoir and I showed him my drawings of the birds of France. I showed him my collection of stones, every stone labeled igneous or metamorphic or sedimentary. I showed him my collection of feathers, every feather labeled, what bird, what part of the bird. My papa was proud of me. He said my boudoir was a veritable museum of art and science, and he wanted to encourage me. So he sent me to study with Jacques-Louis David. You know David, the greatest artist of our day. When he painted Napoleon riding his horse into battle, the horse rearing up on his hind legs, even the horse was life-size. And so was Napoleon was life-size as well. But we spent all of our time in the basement of the museum, drawing stone statues and wooden mannequins. I wanted to draw life. So sometimes I would skip school. I would go to the park. I would draw the trees that grew, the birds that flew, the flowers that bloomed. But I guess I skipped school one too many times. Maybe once is too many. For I was evicted from art school, sent home a failure. My father was so angry. He felt I needed more discipline. And so he sent me to the military academy. Do you recall your school days with fondness? No? Or do you remember your school as a fortress or a prison? My school was a fort that had a prison. But my papa, who taught naval navigation and astronomy, he often said, when you learn to read the stars, you know where you are upon the earth. But when my papa would sail away, the cat is gone, the mice shall play, I would climb the old stone wall of the school and head on down to the shore of the sea. And soon I had amassed a collection of shells. And every shell I found, I would ask, from whence sea hath this shell come? Now one day while I was collecting shells, a professor caught me. He dragged me by my ear, and I'm not speaking metaphorically. He threw me in a dungeon vile for skipping class. I have to admit, I had mixed emotion about the return of my papa. He would set me free, I hope. But he would be so angry at me. At this time, Napoleon began to wage war across Europe. And though my father was an officer, maybe because he was an officer, he knew better than most that not all war is just. My papa did not want to lose his only son. And so he forged my passport and he smuggles me out of the country. When we sailed for America, 68 days across the Atlantic. Pirates! Attacked the ship! Scared me too. You call them pirates, we call them privateers. The French and the British hired them to attack their enemy. But what little gold my father had given me, I had hidden in the ballast down below. I would like to say I arrived safely in New York City, but that would not be true. During the voyage, I contracted yellow fever. Do you know yellow fever? If you know yellow fever, you know that within 4 or 5 days, nearly half of the people who contract the disease do not see another sunrise. But the captain knew the best cure was no cure at all. If the disease did not kill you, the treatment might. They would take blood, bleed you, believing the blood was poisonous, or attach leeches to suck out the poisoned blood. Some say this is what killed my father's friend, Monsieur Washington. It was not disease, but the constant bloodletting. But the captain knew the best cure was no cure at all. So he put me to bed. He put me in the care of 2 elderly Quaker ladies who fed and watered me. But I was so sick I could not stand up. When my strength returned to me, I walked from New York to Philadelphia. Could you imagine making that walk? In 1803, America was a forest, immense, immeasurable. They say a squirrel could climb a tree along the Atlantic Ocean. And that same squirrel could go from treetop to treetop to treetop all the way to the Mississippi River without touching the forest floor. I know this is true because I have made that journey, not in the treetops, but I have walked from the Mississippi to the Atlantic and back several times. It was then that I fell in love with these birds of this land. You have so many birds here in America that one would never see as a little boy growing up in France. From the glittering fragment of a rainbow that is the ruby-throated hummingbird, to the great pink flamingo that lives along the Florida Gulf Coast, from the snowy owl to the white pelican. It was then I began to draw the birds of America in earnest. And I'm not embarrassed to admit, when I first began, I was not so good. I would shoot a bird, I would lay it on the table, and then I would draw it as well as I was able. But my early drawings, they looked like dead birds on a table. So I took my entire portfolio and I threw it to the flames. I burned them all because they were not good enough. And I began again. I thought that maybe I could hang them from the ceiling with string, but they drooped like dead birds. My early portraits would serve fine as a sign for a fowler's shop. So once more, I burned my entire portfolio and I began again. And then one morning I awoke and I knew what I had to do. I ordered my servant to prepare a horse for me and I rode quite rapidly into town. I arrived before the shopkeeper, so I took a bath in Parkyeoman Creek. And when the shopkeepers arrived, I purchased wire, thick and thin, long and strong, every diameter. On my way home, I shot a belted kingfisher. Do you know this bird? Belted because it has a blue or brown belt or band across its chest. King because it wears a crown, more like a mohawk haircut, yes? Kingfisher because it likes to eat fish. I brought this bird home and my miller prepared a board for me. I scored the board with lines, vertical and horizontal. And then I took 3 pins and I pinned each foot to the board. I took a long, thick wire and drove it up through the belly, the chest, the head. With the wire inside, the head did not droop. I took a long, thin wire and I drove it down through the wing. With the wire inside, I could bend the wing and it would hold the position that I desired. And there, pinned to the board, I had what appeared to be a flying bird. But even more, I would measure the beak of the actual bird, and then I would measure the beak of my drawing. I would measure the feather, the talon, so every portion of every bird is exactly life-size. But even more, I tried to capture the story of the bird, its habitat, where it lives, what it eats. It took me more than 30 years, but eventually I drew more than 1,000 individual specimens of 465 species. And every bird I painted, I wrote the story of its life. Published in more than 2,000 pages, 7 volumes, the ornithological biography. So let me challenge you. What are your favorite birds? How many could you name? More than naming them, do you know their story? How they build their nest? What they eat? Whether they live here year-round or migrate? Again, I say, ask a lot of questions and look for your own answers. And Mother Nature will reveal herself. So let me challenge you. Choose a favorite bird. Draw that bird, not really small in the corner of the paper, but fill the page, life-size. And within your drawing, try to highlight some of the differences between the male and female, where they live and what they eat. Try to capture the story of every bird. And if indeed a picture is worth 1,000 words, then each of your pictures can be worth a short essay, 5 to 10 pages about every bird that I drew. Let me help you with your homework. I'll tell you the story of a few of my favorite birds. The great white pelican. My friend Meriwether Lewis, you have heard of Lewis and Clark, yes? When Lewis and Clark came back from their expedition, I used the birds that they collected to name Lewis's woodpecker and Clark's nutcracker. But Meriwether Lewis caught a white pelican on the upper Missouri River. He measured the rubbery gullet and found that it will hold up to 5 gallons of water. Now, unlike the brown pelican, which I also painted, the brown pelican lives in the salt water, the white pelican freshwater. The brown pelican is a solo hunter. It will fly above the bay looking for a fish, and when it spies a fish, fold back its wings and sploosh into the water, hoping to bring a fish to the surface. They are solo hunters. But the white pelican believes, as I do, that we can accomplish so much more when we work together. I have seen them with my own eyes. They sit on the water, shoulder to shoulder, kicking their feet and splashing their wings. A line, imagine, of 20 white pelicans moving along together. And they are schooling the fish, like a pack of wolves will chase a herd of caribou, or a pod of whales will create a bubble net to school the fish. The white pelican, if you could imagine, moving along the surface, splashing their wings and kicking their feet, schooling the fish. I've seen with my own eyes as they bubble in the shallows, hundreds, nay, thousands of minnows. Faced with a difficult choice, what would you decide? Put yourself in their fins. You can leap upon the shore where you will certainly die. Or, like that old English children's game, Red Rover, race towards the pelicans and hope to get through. But all on cue, 20 pelicans will open that rubbery gullet. You do the math. 20 birds, each of them can hold as much as 5 gallons. 100 gallons of water drawn into those huge rubbery gullets. And if you look very closely on the interior, not teeth, but they have a ridge like a sieve, so that when they close the rubbery gullet, the water comes out and the minnows stay there within. I believe it was a poet from my home state of Kentucky who said, "An amazing bird, the pelican, his beak can hold more than his belly can. Inside his beak he'll hold food for a week, but I do not see how the hell he can." Another one of my favorite birds, the great snowy owl. Have you seen this bird in the wild? They range across the Northland, but when it is very cold to the north, they can be chased towards the south. I have seen them as far south as the Ohio River. These birds I painted while I was living in Kentucky. You see, at the falls of the Ohio, Corn Island, there are whitewater rapids and huge rock shelves. And when the river floods, these limestone shells will sometimes collect pools of water. And when the river floods, sometimes large fish will get into the depth of those pools, and when the water runs low, they are trapped. The snowy owl I have seen flying over the river, and when they spy one of those cavities with a fish there within, they do not fly straight down, no. They will land maybe 20 yards away, and then they will walk towards that pool of water. When they get close, they flatten themselves against the rock. When they get closer still, they seem to be crawling, and then with those large talons, they reach out and snatch the fish that is trapped in that pool. Now, if you look very closely at this owl, like all owls, they have very large eyes because they tend to be nocturnal, except the snowy owl lives in the land where the sun shines for 24 hours. So they will hunt during the day, and I've seen it. But most owls hunt at night, and they have these large eyes to gather light. But what is the purpose of this dish of feathers? It actually helps to gather sound. And their ears are located in behind. And they can tell, is it a squirrel up in a tree or a mouse down on the ground? They can triangulate the sound to locate their prey, so they can swoop down and snatch up that mouse, or swoop up into the tree to capture a squirrel. And yes, owls will eat skunks because they have no sense of smell. Skunk sprays an owl. Do you smell anything? I smell nothing, nothing at all. That is why the owl is one of the only predators of the skunks here in North America. Again, what is your favorite bird? Learn something of its life. Look at its beak and you can tell what it likes to eat. Look at the shape of the wings or the talons and you can tell how it lives. Let the bird be your teacher. So the owl is clearly a bird of prey, a beak like a meat hook designed for tearing flesh. Whereas the pink flamingo, I was so enamored with this beak that I actually drew cutaways, interior anatomy, and physiology. If you look at the interior of the beak, upon the tongue, not hairs, but flesh-like structure, flesh-like hairs, called cilia. Their beak is like a trowel, a small shovel. And they will dig into the soft mud, and they cannot see because they are stirring up the mud. But if they feel a shrimp crawling across their tongue, they snap their beak closed, they shake loose the mud, and they swallow the shrimp. And the more shrimp they eat, the pinker they become. If you look very closely at some of these in the background, they need to eat more shrimp, no? Let me share with you one story of my travels across North America. It was in 1810. I had just settled in Henderson, Kentucky, and I'd opened a general store. And my family had moved in with me, but my partner, Rosier, he spoke French better than English. And he thought maybe if we moved our store to St. Genevieve, Missouri, a French settlement, that our business would thrive. And so we loaded our goods onto a flatboat, and we floated down the Ohio River. But I missed my family in Kentucky. And so I sold my share of the store to my partner, Rosier, and I walked from St. Genevieve, Missouri, to Shawneetown, Illinois, and Henderson, Kentucky, 150 miles in 3 days. Another wonderful story, my adventures on the prairie, you can read for yourself. I eventually published 50 short stories about my travels in America, known as the Delineations of American Scenery. Now, there are 100 more stories that I could tell you. Allow me to share with you maybe one more bird. I painted this bird while I was running the general store in Kentucky. I often would travel up the Ohio River to Louisville and to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to purchase goods, and then either float back down the Ohio or maybe on horseback bring the goods with me. But as I was traveling along the Ohio River, off to the southeast, I saw a huge cloud begin to gather and darken the sky. Storms come from the west, not the southeast. I quickly realized this was not a cloud of rain. It was a cloud of birds. There were so many birds that from horizon to horizon, they blotted out the sun, and what fell was not rain. I quickly thought maybe I could count. I've never seen so many birds, and I realized how ludicrous this proposition was. But then I imagined a grid upon the sky. If you look at your sky, imagine lines vertical and horizontal. How many birds in one square? I counted 4. And then how many rows and how many columns? Multiply 4 birds times the number of rows times the number of columns, and then I counted. How long did it take for a single solitary bird to fly from one end of the horizon to the next? About a quarter hour. So 4 skies filled with birds times 4 birds times the number of rows times the number of columns times 3 days. By my estimation, and I admit I am rounding down, 1,200,000,000 passenger pigeons in one single flock. I saw a peregrine falcon dive down and snatch a bird right above my head, and for the next several hours, every bird flew around the place where its comrade had been captured, playing follow the leader, no? I shot one, and I found within its gullet rice that had not yet been digested. Not the wild rice to the north, but the domesticated variety. Where are the closest rice paddies? Maybe Louisiana? I captured one alive, and I fed it rice to see how long it took for the rice to digest. Maybe 18 hours? So in less than 18 hours, this bird had feasted on the rice paddies of Louisiana. By my estimation, it was traveling 60 miles an hour continuously for 18 hours. You have all seen this bird, right? The most common bird in the world. An estimated 6 billion of them once inhabited this land. You have not seen one. Are you telling me that the passenger pigeon is extinct? It is gone forever? It will take another sun and moon and earth, another creation, to create such a beautiful bird? I have trouble believing this. Now, you might be quick to blame the market hunter, and it is true. A market hunter could shoot 200 passenger pigeons in a day, but 200 is what percentage of 1 billion? 0.005%, I believe. Now, it is true that the market hunters, they would harvest hundreds of them, strip the meat, put it in salt in a barrel, and put the barrels on a train to Philadelphia or Baltimore or Chicago. And the market hunters did great damage. But it was not market hunters alone. It was also the destruction of the habitat. I remember when I first came to Ohio, Wabachi, the beautiful one. Ohio was 95% forest. Yet in my lifetime, Ohio was cut of its ancient timber and became less than 5% forest. If you destroy the home, the habitat, their source of food, their nesting grounds. Let me give you a metaphor maybe you can better understand. If I came to your hometown and I destroyed 95% of your town, paying special attention to destroy the schools, the nurseries, so you have no offspring, to destroy the groceries and the warehouses, so you have no food, without food or shelter, without descendants, how long would your species survive? I saw their demise in my lifetime. I remember writing in a letter to my good friend Sir Walter Scott in Edinburgh, Scotland, that I might be the last man to see the wilds of America as they once truly were. I hope that I am wrong. Please, will you prove me wrong? If you love birds as I do, and I know you do, then we must provide a home, a habitat for them. Do you feed the birds? Yes, that's a good place to begin. But if you plowed up your lawn and planted the native prairie grasses and trees, when you provide a habitat, a home, have you built bird houses? Yes. These are small steps you can take. And your yard and my yard and his yard and her yard, together, yard by yard, we might restore the wilds of America as I once knew them. Please, prove me wrong. I hope I am wrong. That maybe your children and your great-grandchildren's children will see the wilds of America as I once knew them.